Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my Destiny video game series perspective. And this is one that I kind of thought of doing when I started doing these perspectives, and I thought that this would be a kind of good time to do it. And I have a lot that I have with this series. Because, well, one, I got like collector's editions of them. So, yeah, I was a Bungie fanboy. Well, I was a fan. I mean, I wouldn't go to complete bat and like defense force kind of shit on things, but I enjoyed Bungie's Halo games, and I'm like, what are they gonna do next? Like, what they were able to do with the Halo series inspired me into looking into trying to get into video games. Now, not to like code or anything like that. I've always had more of the business kind of acumen of doing like the financial kind of stuff or the marketing kind of stuff and helping with like the business kind of portion of doing stuff for video games. But the amount of fun that I was able to get out of Bungie games wanted to be like, okay, cool. So when I saw that they had done the Halo Reach game, that was going to be their last one, they had gotten their freedom from Microsoft, and then we see that they are going to be going into a partnership with Activision. To put that had like a kind of damper and like things of like scariness of what would be going on with their next game is an understatement. Activision has turned into complete and utter insanity. Granted, to the point that we've gotten the news of like Microsoft trying to acquire them and all of the shit and shenanigans going on in there. So yes, we're seeing, okay, let's see what Bungie's game is going to be in 2014. What Destiny is and what it's going to mean. Now, this was also at a time point where we were pretty much getting the launch of the Xbox One and the PS4, and we were still getting certain kind of stuff with when Destiny 1 launched, where you could get it on those newer consoles, or you could get it on like the 360 and the PlayStation 3. That becomes important as we're going through this, so bear that in mind. Because we start to kind of understand certain kind of trends that Bungie starts to kind of push forward with their business model that we've gotten to at this day and age. So, you're seeing some stuff, you're seeing this is supposed to be a 10-year commitment, this as a kind of platform kind of thing, a shared world shooter, not an MMO, but you're a first-person shooter, you're doing all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, let's kind of see how this kind of works out. Now, I did pre-order it. Yes, I know, boo, hiss, cackle, trust me. I thought that this was supposed to be a good game because I trusted the developer. Yeah, you always do that pre-order, and then there's that one kind of pre-order that makes you antsy because you kind of get screwed on things. Granted, this kind of helps, like, they're like, when this came out, I mean, we got, like, the beta for it, and like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting, but then you got through the beta, and you got into the game itself when it launched in 2014, and that goes into September, and you're just like, wow, this is really not up to Bungie standards. Now, granted, I understand that the Halo games do not have the most amazing story possible, okay? Like, the best thing about, like, Halo Bungie games is that they give enough of a story that you're, like, going through, and it interweaves with the funness of the gameplay, if you're into that kind of thing. It's this magical, mystical kind of, like, concoction where you're like, alright, I got a story that's pretty good and keeping me going forward. I got the fun that's also propelling me forward. So you got this kind of rolling thing where you're like, yeah, I'm having fun, I'm playing, I'm learning some shit, and it's pretty kind of cool. Here, the basics of a Bungie shooter are down. It feels good to play. However, we get into it and there's not much there. This shared world shooter is more of a discombobulated, all different kind of zones put together. And this is me liking Destiny 1 better than Destiny 2, okay? Like, I can like something subjectively and understand and point out its flaws as well. That's what you kind of have to get to. Now, granted, sometimes I don't get it completely right, and other people can point out certain things that I've missed and be like, okay, and that could affect my enjoyment. That might not affect my enjoyment. I'll be like, okay, I acknowledge this, but I still like it for some reason because of this, that, the other, but I'm not going to put forth it being this great thing. Because I do think that Destiny 1 is better than Destiny 2. Now, that's for a myriad of reasons that we're going to get into. But you get in, you could pick through 3 classes, Titan, Warlock, Hunter. And you go through, you could actually make 3 of these characters play through, and you had different kind of voices for different kind of characters, because we learn that you have been resurrected by Dinklebot. Well, Ghost, who is voiced by Peter Dinklage in the beginning. How must I say this? Because later on, this has become the I am going to fuck with this thing as much as possible and change it as much as possible because fuck you, that's why it's my thing. That's kind of how Bungie's tack goes, because we have Peter Dinklage in the beginning, and then towards a certain step later on, we get his voice replaced with Nolan North. Now, granted, Peter Dinklage's delivery is part of the charm, if you will, of those early days of Destiny, but it's, I don't know if it's because he didn't have that much inkling of what he was saying, that the directors didn't give him enough to go on, or what, but you're resurrected by this ghost thing, because you're like, hey, okay, you're my guardian, go through, and then you fight these things called the Fallen, which are like these kind of things that are kind of analogous to the Elites from the Halo series, and then you're trying to get to the last city, and we find out that there was this golden age, this traveler, this being, gave humanity this technology and this golden age where people could live longer, have kick-ass technology and everything. However, at a certain point, this other entity, the darkness, came in and shook the foundation of this, pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, and almost killed, like, everybody and everything. However, the traveler was able to push back the darkness with the light, and as its dying gasp let out the ghost to find these people and imbue them with the powers of the light and turn them into guardians. And then you got the races of, like, you could be a human, or an exo, which is a robot that can, like, be rebooted vast number of times, or an awoken, which is like someone that got, like, is usually kind of between light and dark because they were out in space trying to escape, and then woo, kaboosh. Alright, there's a lot of shit. I mean, there's good. This follows the same kind of trend as From Software games. The story that's actively told within the games are usually just like substandard, but the lore behind it is pretty good. However, you had to go to Bungie's website to look at lore cards. Again, that's even kind of even more of a step removed from, like, From Software. I mean, at least that one was in the game. However, it's obtuse as fuck to try and even, like, interact with it. This was a little bit easier to read and understand, where people would, like, make channels devoted to reading the lore and diving into the lore. However, you had to go outside the fucking game to actually fucking get it. So, you've got that. You got your guardian. You pick whichever race you want, which had different kind of voices. You pick whichever kind of class you wanted. And with the Titans and the Warlocks and Hunters, you had different subclasses as well. Void, well, let's see. You had certain kind of ones. You could have, like, Void or Arc on Titan in the beginning. You'd have, let's see. Yes, Void and Arc for Titan in the beginning. Then you had, for Warlock, you had Solar and Void. And then for the Hunter, you had Solar and Arc. They didn't get introduced to the other kind of, like, subclasses until, like, the Taken King introduced them, so that everybody had their all their different kind of class subclasses involved. And you'd have your certain kind of stuff. I picked a Titan human, and I'd usually roll with the Defender Titan because that gave me more of a supporting kind of role. Whereas the Fist of Havoc Titan was more of a kind of one-shot super that would do some kind of crowd control. Warlock would have its whole kind of, like, Dawnblade kind of thing going on, which you could like resurrect and do stuff like that. Kind of a Nova Bomb one, which was crowd control, and then the hunters could do mostly like one-shot damage with their gunslinger or their kind of like arc knife motherfucker. But you get to the last city, you get Bill Nighy as the like speaker telling you pretty much nothing. It's like, oh yes, I'm pretty much giving you the lowdown of what, and it's like, yes, push back, but we don't know what's going on, so go out and do shit. So you fight a little Fallen, you fight a little bit of these other races associated with the darkness, the Cabal, which is very kind of Roman theme, the High, which is just like zombie ass motherfuckers being assholes, and the Vex, which are like time traveling robots with like fucking milk shit in the center. But you're going around, you could play up to with a fire team of like 2 other people, and you could go around, you could do strikes, which are kind of like mini dungeons, and you kind of fucked around for a little bit until they released this thing called a raid. And that is more analogous to like the MMO kind of stuff, where you get together with a group of 6 guardians, and you go into the Vault of Glass and all that. And that was pretty interesting because it introduced puzzling mechanics and stuff that you'd really wouldn't have seen before in like first-person shooters. However, Bungie's mechanics have gone completely and utterly nutty as the series has progressed. Because the Vault of Glass, I really like. Now, granted, you could say that, oh, you're just having nostalgia talk. I'm like, okay, that's definitely a point. I get that because that was the first one I played through, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I got a lot of memories of like gearing up and everything. Gearing in this game and leveling up was a complete and utter fucking nightmare. All right, and it's still a nightmare because they don't know what the fuck to do with it. Okay? So, you're pretty much bouncing around. It's like, but what's the story? It's like, there's Hive on the moon. It's got this Crota dude who killed a lot of Guardians. We'll kind of see him later. The Vex, they're time-traveling motherfuckers. You go into this Black Garden thing to defeat the Dark God of theirs, and it's this strobing motherfucker, and you, like, fight some statues, and then it's like, boop. And that's it. It's like, what? Like, it's so fucked up because if you ever see the meme of I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain, that comes from this and pretty much gives you what Bungie's writing team went to in the beginning of this. Because you really don't have that much of a story. It's mainly just areas that you fuck around in doing stupid busy work with your friends. And it was good enough to kind of do that because sometimes you'd have downtime, sometimes there wouldn't be a good game out, and you're like, alright, cool. And you troll around and everything and do that. And you're like, alright, cool. So, you could have fun with that. And I had fun with that. And I'd have some friends that had fun with that. However, the main group that I had rolled with Bungie games for Halo were like, we're kind of good. And like, would drop off. And then I made some new friends in here. So you got that. You've got PvP, which... Listen, Bungie was good with PvP with Halo. Now, granted, I know there's, of course, the nostalgia on that kind of stuff, and that they could have done things better. However, at the time, they could do a better kind of job of balancing. Why do I say that? Because with that sandbox, you were just balancing it mainly on the PvP front. Here, for some fucked up, inexplicable fucking reason, they decided to fuse the PvE and PvP sandbox. Now, for those of you who are not that much into first-person shooters and not that much into competitive scenes, let me try to explain the insanity that goes on with this. Okay, example. I'm running around in PvE. I'm doing my cool-ass shit. Riding my Sparrow, doing some tricks, shooting some shit. I get this cool-ass gun. Or I go through a raid, and I get this cool-ass gun. This is important because this is in player versus environment, alright? That means if I'm fucking around, I'm not like screwing over someone completely. Like, you know what I mean? So I get this cool ass gun, and I'm popping fools. It's like overpowered. It's like, yeah, okay. And then I go into the PvP, and it's overpowered as shit in there too. And guess what Bungie's got to do? Bungie's got to tune that motherfucker. So they tune it to where in PvP, it's not completely and utterly broken and destroying shit. However, it has completely and utterly made it so that you can't really use it in PvE either. I don't know why you would put those two things together. The whole objective for like player versus environment is to get a weapon or some kind of kit together. By the way, like you'd have armor and everything, but you mainly didn't get like really good bonuses until Bungie's learning later on. So kind of keep that in mind. people that know MMOs, it's like, you really didn't even get that kind of shit until later on with other DLCs. So, you want to be OP as shit. In PvP, you want it to be as fair as shit. You don't want the gun to be able to decide the factor. You want the person's skill. That's usually the objective. How that usually shakes out is anybody else's kind of guess. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes that doesn't really shake out. Mainly it's the better internet. Other shit's involved. What have you. So, I don't think that, like, PvP should have been completely removed from the game. But I definitely don't think that the sandboxes should have been tuned together. Like, yeah, you just send me in with, like, PvP-focused fucking weapons, and I'd been good with that. And then just keep my PvE ones alone. Like, the whole point in PvE is to be a god-slaying, badass motherfucker. So, we then start getting into, like, the content and everything, and the thing is, Bungie did not understand how voracious the community can be with content for this. This is the first failed successful live service game, as I would term it. It succeeded because a lot of people played it and has been pretty much an example of what can be done. It failed because its story was kind of what? It felt really short when you're kind of going through it, if you're going through it like a single-player experience. Not fun if you're going into a single-player experience kind of mindset. And you're just trying to be like, okay, I'm kind of out with this. And then you get into when the DLC's put out, and it gets into the mindset of like, okay, is this cut content? Because we get the first one of like this Crota's End thing. And the thing is, we had a really good raid with the Vaulted Glass. Because you got all these mechanics you're working through, and you're like, yeah, okay. However, you got the RNG aspect of Bungie. Like, if you ever hear RNGesus, or you're like, pray to RNGesus that this is going to work out for you. There are other games that has been happening to, but that's my first kind of recollection where that kind of really popped out and really got that for me. Because I'm like, oh, I get it. Because your whole thing is to keep running content to get what you want. And the thing is, your skill doesn't necessarily determine it. It's if the number generator's like, hey, guess what? You've got this now. Because I got, like, one of the best rocket launchers, Galahorn, just randomly at the end of a PvP match. I'd have to play for fucking ever to get certain other things just to kind of do it. And it's like, my skill doesn't really factor into it. Who I'm running with doesn't factor into it. It's just I keep breaking my head against a brick wall to do this. Now, granted, this was my first kind of experience, and it was able to like slot up between different kind of games going on at the time at 2014, 2015, going on like that. It's like, okay, cool. So we get the new Crota's End, and it's like, okay, you go through this Dark Below story. It's like, okay, it's just the same kind of basic kind of thing. And then we get the Crota's End raid, which is more just like a beefy strike. Like, you could do some weird fucking shit. You could break the shit out of that raid. Now, granted, it was kind of fun to fool around and do shit with, but it was like, I mean, you could fucking unplug an Ethernet cable and fucking take down the boss. And I don't blame people for doing that, because that's on Bungie's part to make sure that that shit doesn't work out. Then we get to the House of Wolves, which didn't introduce a raid this time, but introduced this thing of Prison of Elders, which was a more kind of along the lines of like a strike kind of thing of like going through doing these kind of bosses and everything. And it introduced some other kind of ways to increase your gear and everything like that, which really hadn't been at that point. So you got some DLC, and it's like, okay, I gotta use the DLC stuff because the other stuff doesn't really get up to that kind of high of a power level. But we see that the game's kind of going down, so we get kind of the retooling of the Taken King in 2015. And this, we actually get some fucking story out of it. We fought Crota, we killed Crota. We then get into the introduction of Oryx, his dad, which, like, if you ever want to get into, like, some crazy-ass lore, look into Oryx the Taken King. He was a very effective boss, and you go through, you're fighting his hive shit, you go into his dreadnought, you're fucking around with all this stuff, introduces us to the King's Fall raid. Pretty good raid. However, this is where it starts to get, where Bungie starts introducing mechanics that really fuck with what's kind of going on. Do I think that this is, like, where it went bad for Bungie? No. However, this is where I think it started, where raids started to become overly mechanic heavy. Why is that? Because you have to do certain things and go through them in a certain order. Your skill doesn't matter in this kind of effect. Sisters will take how, like, you can do a little bit more damage, but Orcs' final phase, you had to do these bombs. You had to do all 4 of them. You could kind of change how you kind of did it, a set of bombs at a time or all at once. However, your skill doesn't factor in, your gear doesn't factor in. You have to do certain ways to how to do these certain things. It's like, okay. However, you did get a good story out of it. You get Cade and Erismore interacting, trying to figure out how to fucking take out this giant god of the Hive. And you kick its ass, and you kill it, and you get some sweet-ass weapons and shit. And it's like, alright, cool. You got new subclasses and shit kind of tooling around. It's like, alright, get some interesting kind of ways to, like, grind out some different kind of pathways for certain gears, because you have, like, these exotic weapons that you could just drop randomly in the world. However, Bungie started introducing quest lines to make it a little bit more interesting. However, they are still grindy as fucking shit. I had to do a lot of weird shit for that. So then we see that Bungie decides, instead of releasing Destiny 2 soon at this point, that they needed more time, so they introduced the Rise of Iron DLC. This one was a little bit weird. It had interesting story and lore, however it wasn't presented as much in a great kind of way. However, the raid that was introduced with it, Wrath of the Machine, was really kind of good. However, again, you can see it going towards the overly mechanic, where you have to do certain kind of things in certain kind of ways to do it. So it's like, alright, skill's getting less of a kind of factor into these kind of things. However, you still get good ass gear and shit like that. That kind of pumped out in 2016. So you had a long time between fall of 2015 to about fall of 2016 to get that kind of shit. But then you get this kind of April update. You get the raids brought back in and rotating and everything. And you got a lot of cool shit. So you got Destiny, at the end of its life cycle, had a really kind of interesting kind of way to go about it. And this was kind of the end of it for me. Now, granted, what I mean by that is that was where it was really complete, and where I had friends where I could play certain kind of things with it and kind of go through and do these kind of things. You'd even see me talking about certain kind of things like the Rise of Iron DLC on this channel, too. Destiny 2 popped out in 2017. Now, this is where you can think of where things start to really kind of go off the rails. Alright? And there's a lot of different kind of finger pointing. Now, does Activision have a part to play in this? Of course. Their management kind of style and how they've usually handled their franchises has gone from, well, granted, they're probably okay in, like, more past kind of generations to we will extract as much value out of things as possible. Because you're thinking, okay, they probably wanted a couple DLC, Destiny 1, couple DLCs, Destiny 2, couple DLCs, Destiny 3. Now, with the way technology kind of works, I think that would have been an alright kind of thing. However, if you're crunching the devs to do that, that's the wrong choice to make. Because now we've gotten to the point that this has now been turned into a platform by Bungie. This game came out in 2017. Its foundations are essentially borked, in my opinion, and trying to make that into a platform for you to keep going on and doing things is going to create more problems than it's going to solve. Rather than just create, like, you put it on Legacy, you pump out decent enough kind of DLC content, or even your fucking stupid seasonal models that you've decided to do, and then pump out one last Destiny kind of 3 to make that the actual platform so you can actively scale it and be able to do what you need to do for it. Because this started off doing what I kind of explained with PvE and PvP. Except, instead of pretty much separating them, they decided to pretty much make a system where the PvP kind of tuning would have been able to be done, like, in a better kind of way, and make PvE unfun. You got your dual primary system, where in the other game, you had a primary, a special, and a heavy. Here, you're just like, okay, you have one gun primary that does like some kind of damage. You got your secondary that could pretty much also be a primary that you'd have to use to take down shields or whatnot, and you're having to try and do as much damage as possible. It was an unfun system. The classes and subclasses were retooled to where you got your all three different kind of elements, but in different kind of ways, and I couldn't really be that much of a support titan. And it kind of changed up the way I was playing. I'm like, okay. However, the story was kind of better. We are introduced that's like, alright, we've been pushing back the darkness. However, we see that the Cabal pop up. We got this dude named Gaul. He attacks the last city, and he cuts us off from the light. Alright, let's see how this kind of works. Well, your Guardian pretty much goes out. We're able to get some light back. We push back on everything, and we beat the shit out of Gaul with our Captain America Titan shield. Or whichever kind of other shield that you, or weaponry that you've got from whichever kind of class that you're rolling with. And, of course, you got your Nolan North Ghost talking to you about stuff, and pretty much your Guardian's voice has been pretty much nulled. So Ghost is the one doing the talking here. So it's changing up all the, not completely the stuff that you've had, but it's like, okay, so now we're just doing insert, except we're not really an insert. Ghost is the one doing the talking and pretty much more the main character. Let's see here. And then you wait for the raid, and then you get to the raid, and it's this kind of menagerie kind of thing by this dude named Callus, and you go through these things, and it's more just mechanic heavy, and really wasn't one of the funnest raids. Especially with how everything was kind of put out. You got your supers involved, and the thing is they took longer to kind of go, and you're like, alright, fine. And then we get like 2 DLCs that really just don't really work well. We get The Curse of Osiris, and that was just like, alright, you bust through. It's like, alright, let's do this shit on Mercury. Alright. Then we get Warmind. Let's do this shit on Mars. Because here's the thing. We didn't have access to like all the planets that we had in Destiny 1. We didn't have everything from Destiny 1. They made a whole new thing with like all these different kind of planets. We had Titan, we had Io, we had Earth that we did more in the European Dead Zone. Then, of course, we added Mercury and Mars. And you're just like, okay, I'm not really caring about this because you start seeing this shift. I saw a lot of people kind of shifting away from Destiny on that. I'm like, I don't mind, but I'm like, this is not good. And then you see the DLCs, and it's like, all right, because you get these raid layers that are kind of beefier than the strikes that we've had. And the thing is, the strikes just weren't as fun in Destiny 2 as they were in Destiny 1 for me. Again, I understand that you can level the criticism of nostalgia. However, it's just the way that they kind of worked. It was just like, alright, cool, just do it in the most effective way kind of possible. And just, of course, more of the RNG and more of this stupid, strange leveling system. You level up to a certain level, then you just have to hope that RNGesus gives you the gear that'll put you up to the imaginary number that allows you to not get completely fucking quarter rolled in the ass by a motherfucker. Yeah. So, you start seeing the drop-offs and everything. There is interesting lore kind of stuff popped in, but you don't really get until better kind of stuff until 2018 when they introduced the Forsaken DLC, which shows us going through the story of, we see Kate 6 killed, and, spoiler alert, however, they've already removed this DLC, which we'll get to. And you hunt Aldrin Sob, who has killed him, and we learn that he's under the influence of a wish dragon. And we are then introduced into better kind of endgame kind of mechanics. We're retooled kind of stuff, gotten some new subclass kind of options that we've got. Interesting kind of new exotics. And the raid was interesting, however, continuing to go along the lines of overly mechanized. For at least my enjoyment. Like, I'm like, alright, I don't mind this, but it's like doing all these different kind of things where you got slimmer kind of margins to do, and skill is less of a factor. And also, they take it away, like, you got raid tokens for, like, rezzing stuff. Because in the first game, with raids, you had a easy mode, well, normal mode, and then hard mode. Normal mode, you could res as many times as you want, kind of learn the mechanics, and you'd work out pretty well. Hard mode, you had certain amount of reses that you could do, and it was harder to do, but you got geared up well enough, you'd work pretty well, and you got everything synergized. Here, you don't really get that. You're just like, all right, learn it or don't. It's like, all right, there should be better avenues for that, but continue on. And it was fun enough for what it was, but then you start getting into their next kind of models of just, okay, Black Armory was what came after that, and what really just kind of shit me off with Destiny. It was just grinding the same content over and over and just hoping for RNG for certain things and people to play with, and it just dwindled down to a point that I'm like, I'm done. Even though I bought this kind of stuff, opportunity, sunk cost fallacy, I didn't give a shit. I'm like, alright, because I played the Black Armory, I played that kind of DLC raid layer, which was interesting, but I'd always have to like go to LFG, wrangle people together, and then we disperse, and then I have to keep doing that over and over again. If I have to keep doing that, and I have to pretty much go out to outside systems for that, it was just so much of a time hassle and not fun. It got to the point where I'm going to keep bringing that up for many series. I started looking into it, and I'm in my head, am I having fun? And the answer was no. And I left. I didn't do anything. I kind of looked in for certain kind of things, but there was a Joker's Wild that I'm like, I don't care about, like Gambit, this system that was introduced in Forsaken with the Drifter kind of dude. The Menagerie sounded kind of interesting, but I'm like, I'm not going back for that. Then they did the Shadowkeep DLC, which focused on Eris Morn and bringing back an old Destiny location, the Moon. And I'm like, I'm not really that much into it, but I had like money that was going to expire, and I heard other rumblings for things, and this one wasn't really that good of a DLC from what I heard either. It introduced more of the darkness and these pyramid kind of things, trying to deepen the lore and the story. It's like, alright, cool. I just didn't really care that much for it. And again, trying to find people to do stuff and play with just wasn't working. Then we get that they're doing this seasonal model where if you're not subscribed to what's kind of going on, you lose out. So they would do these kind of things, have these couple months of seasons, a couple months for a season, and then the story's done, and then you can't get that stuff and you can't get that story. So it's like, okay, you're actively weaponizing FOMO, fear of missing out, and I'm like, no, thank you. And then we start getting the news that Bungie is breaking from Activision. It's like, all right, cool. We'll have to see how that kind of works out. Spoiler alert, that didn't work out that well. All right, because they're still doing that kind of seasonal model. And then they introduced Beyond Light, and and this was important, because that got on the Game Pass. I'm like, okay, I played around a little bit with that, reconnected with some friends. However, what it did is it started taking away content. They did this to say that they needed to, like, oh, we have to do this to make sure that everything's good and we can do this content vault. This is where Bungie stopped for me, like, completely. Like, I bought Destiny 1 stuff, and that's complete. Okay, now granted, when the servers go down, I can't play that anymore. Fine, okay, I kind of get that. Destiny 2, they say to keep everything file size wise and everything working out, when adding DLC, that they are now taking DLC and putting it in Content Vault. They took stuff out of the game. I've never seen an MMO or any kind of other thing do that. Alright? Now, we'd seen rumblings of that kind of stuff in Destiny 1, because Rise of Iron was not released for the 360 to PlayStation 3, saying that those systems couldn't handle it or whatnot. I'm like, okay, interesting. Here, it's just like, we have to make sure that the file size isn't getting nutty, like Call of Duty's kind of stuff. But I'm like, that's not right. And you're going to be like, okay, it's a license, you're pretty much renting anything that they've got, so they can do whatever the fuck they want. I'm like, alright, cool, but now I'm not going to buy anything from them ever again. Because if I buy something, I want full use of that until its end of life. I don't get that with Destiny 2. Like, the stuff that they introduced with Beyond Light, from what I heard and what I kind of played through, didn't really make up for. I'm like, yeah, even though that's worse stuff, they took away the base game and DLCs 1 and 2. It's like, so how does anybody like understand the story? It's like they don't care. You either stay with it and ride it as an addict doing all the kind of stuff, or you don't play. I'm like, all right then, you made the choice for me. I don't play and I don't support that kind of shit. And they're going to keep kind of doing that because they did the same thing with the Witch Queen, from what I heard. It's like, all right, other stuff's going into the content vaults. It's like, it's not right. And the stuff, while sounding interesting, just pricing wise, I don't care for. It's like, there's better and other games that I'd rather play than that. That's why I got the jacket on for this shit, because it gets nutty, because they as a studio have just completely gone downhill. And they made that decision, trying to be independent and everything. And of course that becomes interestingly to examine, because they have been recently purchased by Sony for like $3.6 billion. And I think Sony vastly overpaid for them, because we see Bungie do this continuous cycle of trying to be independent, not working out, and then utilizing whichever person can like bankroll them, and then trying to get out of that, and then continuing to screw with it. Like, I'm not trying to like shit on the devs or anything like that, but their management for what Bungie's been doing for all these years really isn't that good if you look upon this whole kind of length of timeline. Because they got together with Microsoft because they needed money and they're doing everything, and then towards the end they're like, we don't want to do Halo forever. Which Microsoft should have been like, alright, fine, do something else. I don't know what the internal negotiations were like with that kind of thing, but they left and they did their thing with Activision, which is like, that's not a smart kind of move to make. But then we start seeing Bungie making these kind of decisions. And it's just, you remove content from the game. And you just keep using Destiny 2. Because that pops around, it's like, okay, this is getting a long in the tooth game, so I would pretty much put out a new platform. Like, there's not going to be Destiny 3. We're just going to keep Frankensteining this fucking thing and changing things. And I'm like, that's just going to spin. You're just going to plate spin until this thing kind of blows up, aren't you? Alright, cool. Hopefully it doesn't blow up, and that's what you're kind of banking on, and you can just, like, make all the money that you can out of it. Now, granted, if you like this game and you like playing it, that's fine. Okay? That's cool. You enjoy it, and you're alright with their business practices, that's cool. Support them if you want them. But I think it's fundamentally wrong to remove content like that. And if they can't get their shit under control with file size and making sure that everything works together, to try and do that as best as possible and try and do a new kind of platform for it. That just shows that it's going to go completely screwed off at some point. Like, I understand that World of Warcraft is an old game, but they're still able to do all the kind of stuff and, like, work within the DLC. Final Fantasy XIV hasn't removed content to my knowledge. And if I'm wrong on any of that, teach me. Give me the information. I don't mind being called out with that stuff. Alright? Like, I love learning new things, and if there are other examples of video game places doing these kind of practices, I want to avoid them as much as possible, because I don't think that's right. Okay? If you buy something, and especially buy something DLC-wise for a game, I believe that you should be able to use that for the entire length of the game. And if there's a game maker that does that kind of practice of taking that kind of stuff away and putting it on their guys of like, oh, we'll put it in the vault and bring it back out whenever we want. I'm like, okay, that's cool for you, but I don't want to support that. And as you'd probably be like, oh, you're just salty that like Sony bought Bungie, and I'm like, no. I think that Sony vastly overpaid for it, and they are not going to get out what they want from Bungie. Okay? This is not me being like, I want Microsoft to buy them and make them better and everything like that. That would be kind of cool thing. Alright, fine. But I would honestly rather just let Bungie flail and just do fucking crazy shit and then eventually learn from it on their own to be the better independent studio. I think Sony's trying to go more in the live service game, and since Bungie has done the only kind of successful failed one, because the Division is like, you don't really hear that talked about. And most other live service games aren't doing that well. Even Halo Infinite. God, live service games. As a concept, we have seen that live service games are very hard to execute well, if they can even be executed well at all. Because it is just insanity to think that you can keep up with the way that certain fan bases and certain players can go through content. Like, I would just rather have a good kind of schedule of a cadence where people aren't fucking killing themselves to make this content, and just have a good kind of cadence and be like, alright, fine, we're good. So it will be interesting to see how Bungie kind of works out under Sony's banner, and what Sony kind of tries to get out of them for live service games and what they're trying to do. But I know they say that they're still being multi-platform and everything like that, and I don't mind, like, if they even went as an exclusive route, though. I think that as I've gotten older and gotten more information, that certain exclusivity things should be kind of done after a certain set amount of time, to just be like, let everybody play the game, man. Who gives a fucking shit? So if, like, the next day it'd be like, hey, all this Destiny content and shit's pretty much, like, locked to PlayStation. I'm like, that's stupid, but go for it. See how it kind of works out for you. But yeah, I do think that Sony shouldn't have done that. And I know it comes around the same time that, like, Microsoft has been making all these acquisitions and trying to get Activision Blizzard and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, they're trying to retaliate and everything like that. I'm like, no, I was probably thinking about it for a while, especially since they had done exclusivity DLCs for, like, the first Destiny. That was fucking stupid. Like, year-long fucking shit. And by the time it came out, you're like, there was exclusive DLC for Rise of Iron that you couldn't get until after Destiny 2 popped the fuck out. And at that point, what's the point? You know, like, it's just Bungie changing from a studio that you'd be like, okay, they might have some problems, they might have some issues with how they've implemented or done certain things with certain Halo games or whatnot, but overall you felt the kind of respect with the community and kind of that passion for game development to wherever the fuck they are now. I don't trust them. I think that their tactics are psychologically manipulative with how they've done certain things within the game, and how they get you to chase certain things and do certain things and make it into pretty much a second kind of job, if not a first kind of job, for how certain people play it. And it's just like, it then goes back to my most fundamental question for a game, and why I stopped playing. Am I having fun? And if I'm not, I don't play it. Because that definitely happened to me with Halo Infinite. Because of how those challenges, I swear to God, I would get a certain challenge, I'd have to play a certain thing, and the system would pretty much, like, fight me on the thing. And be like, I haven't seen this thing in, like, for fucking ever, so I guess this challenge can be, like, thrown away. And it just, when you get that kind of thing, it also affects other people playing, because they're trying to get their challenges, to get their cosmetics, and get all this different stuff on the Battle Pass. And then you're just like, am I having fun? No. You move. You go off. You have to. Like, that is the best kind of piece of advice I can give anybody with a game. Even if you're a completionist and if you're trying to, like, beat a game, you can get some kind of fun and enjoyment out of that. Alright? But whenever you sit down and whenever you play a video game and whenever you do something within that video game, always ask yourself that question. That is, like, the most important thing that I'm getting out of doing these perspectives. If you ask yourself, am I having fun? And that answer is no. Cut your shit, man, and just be like, alright, I'm going to find something else to do. Read a book, watch a show, find another game, find something else. Find something that gets that fun. Even if it's like an indie game or an old game or this kind of weird new game that popped out. Just find something and find that thing, and when you do it, and you're doing it for enjoyment, you're doing it to, like, blow off steam or whatnot, and you're doing it to just kind of, like, get into a good headspace and play it and be like, I'm having fun. Get that and grab that. And recognize the fact that certain series and certain franchises that used to be fun do not always stay that way. And that fucking sucks, and that fucking hurts. And I get that. Alright? Bungie, Halo, Dead Rising. Just, if you're not having fun, just go to someplace else. And I understand and I'm not saying that to also like wipe away the feelings of like hurt that you can get from like having those certain franchises that mean something to you, that have like helped you create your identity as a person sometimes, of like, this is what I like in certain games, this is what I think is fun in a first person shooter or whatnot. Yeah, deal with those emotions, but deal with them in as positive ways you can. And be like, okay, this used to be fun and now it's not. And it sucks that I'm letting this go, but in order for me to be better, instead of trying to like beat my head against a wall because the criticism's not getting heard, they're not listening to fans, they're not trying to do better, they're just doing the same stuff or doing their own kind of stuff for their own different kind of fan base. Alrighty then, have that fan base. Bye bye, I'm gone. Okay, cool. Yeah. And that's kind of what I did with Destiny. It sucks. But yeah, it kind of screwed over kind of multiplayer kind of stuff for me. Not to the complete extent, mainly because you just see how multiplayer is morphed into this god fucking weird shit with like, hey, get these cosmetics, hey, do these kind of things, and doing weirder kind of shit, and just trying to get you to play that kind of shit exclusively, where I used to play those multiplayer games because they were fun. And it just goes back to that. But that is my kind of relationship with the Destiny franchise and what I think and feel on how they've been handled and what Bungie fuck all rest could kind of do afterwards. Like, I know that they've got a couple other DLCs and they're going to have like a conclusion of the story, but I don't know what the hell they're going to be doing afterward with it. They're working on whatever. That's cool. I wish them the success that they want and deserve. So, go for it. But those are my opinions on this video game series. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you like it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.